Good afternoon and welcome to Bloomberg Crypto. I'm Kailey Leinz with Sonali Bostic, and I am live outside the U.S. District Courthouse in New York City, where FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried's trial is underway. We are starting with jury selection for what prosecutors call one of the biggest financial fraud cases in American history.
And Kailey, we have a full lineup of guests for this hour. We're going to hear from the former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. That is Josh Naftalis, plus Kristin Smith, the CEO of the Blockchain Association, former U.S. Senator Pat Toomey, and Kavita Gupta from the Delta Blockchain Fund.
It's an awesome guest lineup, but before we get there, let's first take a moment to look back at how we got here.
In the span of 3 years, Sam Bankman-Fried became one of crypto's biggest stars. In May 2019, Bankman-Fried and business partner Gary Wang founded FTX. Its goal? To create a safe and responsible platform for traders. By October 2021, venture capitalists had poured millions into FTX, and A-list celebrities like former NBA player Shaquille O'Neal, model Gisele Bündchen, and comedian Larry David had endorsed it. That same year, the firm was valued at $25 billion, and users soared to more than 5 million globally, at least 1.2 million of them in the U.S. The FTX name became well known, appearing on t-shirts, in commercials, and even on an NBA arena. By early 2022, the Bahamas-based company's valuation skyrocketed to $32 billion. FTX had become one of the world's biggest crypto exchanges. Bankman-Fried's net worth climbed to $26 billion, and he said he wanted to do good with his money, following effective altruism.
I both think it's not what I should do with my money. I think I should be thinking about how I can help the world with it.
The then 30-year-old also became a major political donor. He contributed tens of millions to bipartisan political action committees and frequented Capitol Hill to be a voice for his company and the industry. At the time, he had no plans to slow down.
I'm going to be here for the long term. I have no plans to leave. That is not something that is on my horizon.
But in November of 2022, things began to unravel. CoinDesk reported that the crypto hedge fund Bankman-Fried had also founded, Alameda Research, had a significant portion of its assets made up of FTT, a token that FTX created. In response, on November 6th, CZ, the CEO of rival crypto exchange Binance, posted to social media saying, quote, "We have decided to liquidate any remaining FTT on our books." The move triggered a massive wave of withdrawals, sort of like a run on the bank, and FTX didn't have the funds to meet them. In a rescue attempt, FTX reached a deal with Binance to sell itself, but Binance backed out.
It became very quickly, there was a lot of funds missing, like to the tunes of, double-digit billings. I couldn't trust any of the information in the data room.
So by November 11th, it was over. FTX filed for bankruptcy and Bankman-Fried resigned as CEO. That same month, he apologized at a public event.
I made a lot of mistakes or things I would give anything to be able to do over again. I didn't ever try to commit fraud on anyone. But
just a few weeks later, Sam Bankman-Fried was indicted, accused of misappropriating billions of dollars at the cryptocurrency exchange.
It's fair to say that by anyone's lights, this is one of the biggest financial frauds in American history.
And we're joined now by Bloomberg's Mr. Elena Agolfopoulou, who leads the U.S. legal team here and has been covering the case. When you look at what the prosecutors might bring forward to build their case, what are you expecting?
So really, Sam Bankman-Fried here faces 7 charges, 5 of which carry a maximum prison sentence of 20 years. The most important charge is the wire fraud charge, which really speaks to the heart of what this case is about. Did SBF knowingly take money out of FTX customer funds and use them to, engage in speculative trading through Alameda Research, to buy real estate property in the Bahamas, or to, for political donations? That is the gist of what the prosecutor's case is sort of relying on. And what we're expecting to see is a lot of evidence of what was going on behind the scenes at FTX. So think about that infamous balance sheet that circulated when the story first broke, or any data that shows, what these executives were talking about. But the key here is to prove intent. Did SBF know that this was happening? And if prosecutors are able to essentially prove that, that sort of gets SBF in a lot of trouble.
Okay, so if that's the aim of the prosecutors, to prove intent, how is the defense likely to counter that, considering Sam Bankman-Fried has pleaded not guilty to all 7 of these charges?
He's pleaded not guilty, Kailey, but he's also been in jail for the past month, which I think is an important thing to remember. His bail was revoked, and since then, all of his lawyers have gone to the judge and said, hey, listen, it's been extremely difficult for us to prepare him for this case. So he's kind of going into this trial already feeling like he hasn't necessarily been given enough time to prepare his defense. What he's going to try to do, based on what he's hinted leading up to the trial, is essentially say, this wasn't my fault. I didn't intend for this to happen, and I didn't know this was happening. It was bad risk management, but I never wanted to steal anyone's money. And that's going to be sort of what he's really going to try to push for. But he has a lot to go up against, particularly since the prosecution is bringing in 3 cooperating witnesses, Caroline Ellison, Gary Wang, and Nishad Singh, who are all in his inner circle and know what was going on behind the scenes. So that is probably going to be one of the few peak moments throughout the entire trial.
Yeah, and all 3, of course, have pleaded guilty to criminal charges as well. Great setup, Bloomberg's Mizerlina Agafupolo. Thank you very much for joining us. But let's look closer at what is happening today, and that is jury selection. Let's talk about how jurors are selected for such a high-profile case such as this one, and bring in Chris Dominick, Senior Jury Consulting Advisor at IMS Consulting and Expert Service. He has advised clients on some of the nation's highest-profile trials. So, Chris, thank you very much for being with us. How difficult is this to find a jury in a case that has gotten so much media attention and has touched a lot of people?
It's difficult. It'll definitely take some time. They're going to want to question people pretty closely about some of their attitudes on this particular case, and they're going to want to dig in on some issues to try and get what we call cause challenges, which are ways for the court to actually find that somebody may be biased and, well, basically remove them from the pool. That means that the attorneys don't have to use some of their peremptory challenges that they only get a fixed amount of.
What do we know about the jurors' perceptions of crypto and of this case itself, given how high profile it has been? We've already heard one of the jurors or potential jurors come forward and say she actually had an investment with FTX, but feels that she could be impartial. Obviously, that is not going to make it too far onto making the jury stand.
Yeah, no, that's a difficult situation, because if they say they can be fair, but they had a big problem, then it's up to the judge to determine if they are somebody who's suitable for this case or not. I'll tell you, in terms of the national understanding here, we learn a lot of what we do through focus groups and mock trials. And there's also polls. And in this particular case, we have the fortunate nature that the Pew Company, Pew Research, did a poll on what Americans who have heard about cryptocurrencies think about them. And 75% are not confident in their safety and reliability. So that means that the defense team has a lot of work to do in making sure that some of the people that are eligible potentially aren't going to be sort of biased from the very beginning.
How do you expect the prosecution and defense to employ strategies in this kind of scenario, given even just the jury selection process is so difficult?
Right. Well, I think the key here is getting people to be as honest as they possibly can, getting them to open up, because certainly high-risk jurors for the prosecution are people who are anti-government, anti-regulation, people who are very pro-free market capitalism, maybe even people that are fans of Sam Bankman-Fried and maybe don't want to talk about it too openly, but you can get that out of them. Maybe they think he's misunderstood. There's certainly some people that might say, hey, crypto's basically gambling, and if you had your money in this, you should have known what you were getting into. That's not necessarily a broad sentiment, but those are the kind of people you certainly have to identify. And on the defense side, you definitely want to make sure that people are talking about what their stance on government white-collar prosecutions are. There's a lot of people who believe that the government hasn't been tough enough on white-collar crime as it should be. They think it's really common for companies to cook the books, or it's common for executives to get rich at the expense of everyday people. That kind of thing is what you're trying to get out, because that's the kind of thing that'll allow you to make some of your decisions about what we call deselection, because although it's called jury selection, Actually, you only have the power to get people off of the jury by using either cause challenges from the court or peremptory challenges from what you've been given, which is a fixed amount on each side.
All right, really helpful insight to get on this jury selection day in this trial. IMS Senior Jury Consulting Advisor Chris Dominic, thank you very much. We appreciate your time. Now coming up, we're going to have more on how Sam Bankman-Fried plans to defend himself, despite some of his closest allies set to testify against him. Here's how former FTX U.S. President Brett Harrison, who left the company before it went bankrupt, felt after learning about the allegations.
It's so clear that there were deliberate steps taken to mislead investors, to mislead internal employees like myself, to hide what was happening from the general public. And that has been sort of the most shocking part of all of this, that this was not something that we could have ever really known, given what steps were taken to hide this from everyone.
Sophisticated at all. Sophisticated perhaps in the way they were able to sort of hide it from people, frankly, right in front of their eyes. But this isn't sophisticated whatsoever. This is just plain old embezzlement.
That was current FTX CEO John Ray testifying on Capitol Hill last year. Now let's discuss Sam Bankman-Fried's defense with former Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Josh Naftalis. He is now a partner at Palace Partners. So Josh, thank you very much for being here. We, of course, have heard repeatedly from Sam Bankman-Fried in the lead up to this trial actually beginning, say it was never his intent to commit fraud on anyone. He has pleaded not guilty to all of these charges. How difficult is this going to be, though, for his defense team?
I think it's going to be a big lift for him. Intent in white-collar cases is always a hard thing to prove up for the government. But in this case, as Mr. Ray said, it was a straightforward case of embezzlement and misappropriation. So Mr. Bankman-Fried is going to be faced with what is really a pretty simple story. And I think it's going to be hard for him to the extent he takes on the burden, to defeat that.
Well, and of course, the prosecution is aided by the fact that they have three pretty key cooperating witnesses. Gary Wang, who co-founded FTX, Nishad Singh, who is the head of engineering, Caroline Ellison, who is the CEO of Alameda Research. How critical are they going to be in this case?
I think they're going to be key. I mean, cooperating witnesses are really the best evidence that the government has. They give a window into what happened, and that's what the jurors want to hear in the end. The emails, the bank records are a little dry, but the drama is really from the people who committed the crime with him.
Matter here, Josh. How difficult will it be for the government to be proving intent in a case like this?
I don't think this is going to be that hard of a case for the government. If they keep it at a high, simple level, which is this, as Mr. Ray said, again, this is about misappropriation, lies, and greed. And with when Kailey mentioned the cooperating witnesses, between those and all the documents and the admissions that Mr. Bankman-Fried has made, I think if the government keeps marching along as it will, getting the evidence in, we'll likely see a conviction.
How much is he expected to testify himself?
My expectation is that he will testify, or it's more likely than the average white-collar defendant.
And of course, he's not average for a number of reasons, Josh, including that just a year ago, this was someone who had tens of billions of dollars at his disposal and quickly saw it all disappearing. Obviously, there are a number of charges in this case. There's 7 in total. Which, in your mind, are A, the most serious and most likely to result in a conviction?
In the end, they're all actually about the same thing. I know that there's white-collar wire fraud and securities fraud and conspiracy, but the story is really taking money that he shouldn't have had, misusing it, and telling lies to investors and to the customers.
And of course, conviction would really just be step one. Then there's the sentencing question, and we've been talking all day about how he could very well, if convicted, spend the rest of his life in prison, given some of these charges come with a 20-year maximum sentence. Do you think, if found guilty, that would actually happen? What kind of sentence would you expect him to get?
Yes, he faces, if convicted, life in jail. I mean, the closest analog is Bernie Madoff, who, of course, got life in prison. So I think that will be the argument the government may make. I think it's unlikely he gets that long in the end because he's so young.
Oh, interesting.
Josh, obviously this is a historic case that we're seeing when it comes to the world of white-collar crime. It involves crypto, but really it involves a lot of financial techniques we've seen before in other white-collar crime cases. What about it to you is the most striking?
I agree with you. It's a crypto case, but it's not, and that's what the government will focus on. Is that it's really just financial fraud in the crypto space. I think the defense is going to want to make it all about crypto, and the government's going to want to make it sort of a piece with the standard, large, multi-billion-dollar fraud that is obvious for the jury to follow.
And we find often on this show, Bloomberg Crypto, that there are varying degrees of familiarity with crypto as a concept. So especially given today, this jury selection that is happening, how crucial is the jury and their pre-existing knowledge or not going to be in this case?
I don't think that pre-existing knowledge is a good or a bad here. I think what people, meaning either side of the case, are going to want to get out of the jury are people who have a bias for or against crypto. But the understanding of crypto, which no one can really pretend to be an expert in, is not something that the government wants to go near. I think the defense may want to go there, but it's not something that I would expect a jury to have.
And just on the subject of defense, and we've said a number of times how Sam Bankman-Fried is an unusual white-collar crime defendant, not just in that he may testify himself over the course of this trial, but he has been so vocal in the media, making appearances, trying to make his case, not having his defense attorneys do it. How does that complicate things for his legal team?
I think it makes it much more difficult. He has great lawyers, but controlling a defendant like him is adding to their burden. I mean, the evidence is what it is. It seems rather strong, but when he's out in front of the media, he's just adding another layer. Obviously, the judge is not happy with him either.
And finally, we have been told that this trial could take weeks, up to 6 weeks potentially, unless something happens, right? Do you think there's any real probability of potentially a plea deal, or you think that is not something that would be pursued in this case?
I don't think that the government's going to offer anything at this point. I read that one of the prosecutors said in front of the court this morning there have been no formal offers. And now that they're in jury selection, I think that they're going to make him what's called eat the indictment. If they've gone this far, they prepared. It's a great team of prosecutors, and I don't think that they're going to.
So it's too late.
It's too late, I think.
That's Palos Partners' Joshua Naftalis. Thank you so much for your time. Now, coming up this month, we learned that FTX sued the parents of Sam Bankman-Fried for allegedly exploiting their access to the son's wealth. The details up next. And as a reminder, you can listen to Bloomberg's Spellcaster podcast and the chronicles of the rise and fall of Bankman-Fried. Listen ad-free on Wondery Plus, on Apple Podcasts, and on Amazon Music. This is Bloomberg. FTX is suing Sam Bankman-Fried's mother and father in order to, quote, recover millions of dollars in fraudulently transferred and misappropriated funds. We're going to bring in Bloomberg's Max Chafkin, who recently wrote about how the Stanford scholars opened the doors for Sam and provided a halo effect for his company. When we're looking at this trial start to go underway, there is a cloud over the head of the Bankman-Fried family in terms of what was the role of his parents. What was the role of his parents?
Well, it's complicated, and as we've seen this court proceeding proceed as well as the bankruptcy, we're seeing that they are both kind of his parents. They've served as the, the normal mom and dad role, but also as his lawyers at times, de facto lawyers at times, maybe at times his official lawyers. Sam Bankman-Fried has been a little bit fuzzy on it, maybe deliberately so. They are, we should say, famous law professors. They both work at Stanford. Bankman-Fried's mother, Barbara Fried, is a famous ethicist. And what makes it so interesting about this case is that they were part of the reason that Sam Bankman-Fried was taken so seriously. A lot of people, there were reasons to be skeptical of an overseas crypto exchange. And one of the big reasons investors, including Sequoia Capital and others, went in with this company was that they thought, hey, the son of Stanford lawyers, what could go wrong?
Okay, so they lent him credibility, and so much of this does come down to how that credibility ultimately imploded, Max, yet they haven't actually been accused of any wrongdoing here. So are they likely to come up at all in this trial? If not to testify, are they likely to be used against him at all in some way?
Well, so two things. One is they have not been accused by prosecutors of any wrongdoing. They have not been charged. FTX, the company that is bankrupt and is trying to recover customer assets, has accused them of, being part of the misappropriation of customer funds, which they've denied. I think it's looking unlikely that they will be, testifying in court. They will probably be in court. They've been, I don't think they're there today, but they've been there, by his side throughout, and there is some chance that they will come up. They've come up in the court filings. They were, CC'd, on numerous emails, especially as the crisis was unfolding. And Barbara Fried, as we learned in the FTX lawsuit, may have been involved in some of the political contributions, which has been another sort of nexus of prosecutorial, questioning.
Knowing that some of his friends, or former friends at least, have been cooperating with the government on this trial, what does this mean for maybe the silence of his parents in between?
Well, first of all, I think, there's a difference between somebody's parents and their colleagues. And I think from the prosecutor's point of view, well, I think if you believe the narrative the prosecutors have laid out, right, Sam Bankman-Fried was this, amazing fraudster who tricked everyone. I don't think it's hugely surprising, again, if you buy their narrative, which Sam Bankman-Fried denies, that he would, fool the parents. And so in some sense, of all the people most likely to believe the story that he was selling, who else but his mom and dad? Of course, Sam Bankman-Fried appears to have used the fact that his dad was a lawyer and then eventually became an FTX employee to both, operate the company, and Joe Bankman, his father, was involved in numerous decisions along the way, and also became sort of part of the public face of the company.
Bloomberg's Max Chafkin, thank you for your time. I suggest you guys read the Business Week story if you haven't yet. Now up next, how the downfall of FTX impacts crypto lobbying efforts in Washington for the better or worse. We're going to discuss that with Blockchain Association's Kristin Smith, the fallout of FTX in the middle of this trial. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Crypto. I'm Kailey Leinz, live outside the U.S. District Courthouse in New York City, where FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried's fraud trial is underway. We're now joined by Bloomberg colleague Zeke Fox, who literally just wrote the book on crypto, including the collapse of FTX. The book is titled Number Go Up: Inside Crypto's Wild Rise and Staggering Fall. So, Zeke, you are literally the first person I thought of when we were talking about doing a show on this trial day, given that you were a real witness not only to the meteoric rise of Sam Bankman-Fried, but then also everything that happened after his fall. How different does crypto more largely look in the aftermath than it did before?
I've spent a couple years trying to figure out what crypto was good for. I went all around the world for my book. The one thing that I found was gambling. And now here we are, Sam Bankman-Fried. We thought he ran what was basically like the most trustworthy, the most legit casino in crypto, FTX. And it turns out he was stealing all the money out the back of the casino. So I feel like it doesn't look good for crypto. Who's going to trust the next boy genius who comes along and says he's got a great new app or a great new coin?
Well, now it's important to say that he has pleaded not guilty to all of these charges.
Yes.
He maintains that he had no intention of committing fraud. And yet this wasn't just kind of about him as an individual. He was really a figurehead. He spoke for the industry in many ways on Capitol Hill and elsewhere. So how much is there just kind of a cascading effect that everything else just gets lumped in with Sam Bankman-Fried and the FTX fall?
No, definitely. I mean, he, in a weird way, seemed like the grown-up in the crypto world, even though he dressed like a college kid. So he seemed like he had all this credibility on Capitol Hill. He was the one who was lobbying for regulation that would bring crypto in and sort of legalize it. Now that's been totally crushed, and it's very hard for people to make the case like, oh, we need more people like this. We need these great American entrepreneurs to be able to operate from here.
Has it been totally crushed? On one hand, I hear you, because Bitcoin has crashed really significantly since it's peaked, but it has been one of the best performing assets this year. And you do hear congressmen still talking about bills they want to pass, at least on the days that they're not dealing with other problems among their staffing. Do you think that there are still cries to keep the story alive?
I mean, it's not even just the Sam Bankman-Fried trial. We got Alex Mashinsky of Celsius, who's going to be on trial soon for a fraud that in normal times would rank as like a huge one that would get a ton of attention. I mean, I think that it's really going to be tough. The crypto guys are trying hard to keep it going, but consumer interest has totally plummeted, and I just don't see what they're going to do that's going to get, the next bubble going again after this one popped.
All right, Zeke Fox, author of Number Go Up, Inside Crypto's Wild Rise and Staggering Fall. Thank you very much. Also, go read the book if you haven't yet. Now, yesterday, a bipartisan group of House Financial Services Committee members urged the SEC to immediately approve a spot Bitcoin ETF applications as Chair Gary Gensler continues to question the crypto industry as a whole. Let's bring in Kristin Smith. She is the CEO of the Blockchain Association, joining us from Washington, D.C., where she spends a lot of time on Capitol Hill talking to lawmakers about the efforts underway. Kristin, how much has your work, has the work of the industry as a whole to try to get itself regulated and to out of this kind of what many allege is regulating by enforcement on the part of the SEC, how was all of that made harder because of Sam Bankman-Fried and the collapse of FTX?
Well, Kailey, you're right. I mean, it's certainly much more difficult having the narrative of Sam out there. But I think since all of these events went down last November, that we've seen a tremendous number of leaders and founders with the industry step up to come to Washington. They are here doing education and advocacy. They are hiring internal lobbyists, internal policy people, intern marketing and communication specialists that focus on policy. There are a lot of people on the ground that have been working very hard this year, and I think we've been very successful in convincing at least part of Congress that this is really a story of a crook, not a story of crypto, and that there is good things that are being built here, and that we're very excited to move forward and find appropriate regulation for this space.
Kristin, even if you believe that it is one or two or contained number of bad actors in the crypto space, how can consumers have the certainty here that lawmakers, that regulators have done enough to make sure FTX doesn't happen again?
Well, you have to remember what FTX did was already illegal, and what FTX also did largely happened overseas. I think what's going to be interesting as not just the trial but the bankruptcy unfolds is that the FTX U.S. customers, which were heavily regulated by state money transmitter licenses and the Bank Secrecy Act and other laws, I think that we're going to find out that they were a lot better off than the folks around the world who were customers of FTX. So I think that we're seeing a lot of progress in Congress, right? I think as we spoke a couple weeks ago, in July, this summer, we had two very important bills, one on market structure regulation and one on stablecoins, make its way through committees in the House. These bills aren't yet perfect, but discussions are ongoing and underway, and we're continuing to see progress. And if we can ever get past the drama that we're seeing on the House floor this week, I think these are bills that could make it through the next step before year end.
Yeah, Kristin, to your point, we are waiting this hour to see if a motion to table, the motion to vacate House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, is voted on the House floor. We're really waiting to see the fate of the majority leader in the House Speaker himself. So we, of course, will keep you updated on that. But when it comes to the business of crypto and you talk about the efforts Congress has underway, who is the voice that is speaking to these lawmakers, trying to, form this legislation in the industry? Because it wasn't just about how Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX were important for the industry, being one of the largest crypto exchanges, but also he was really seen as a leading voice on the Hill in testimony to lawmakers, making himself known in Washington. Who fills that void?
Yeah, well, I think there are many voices that are filling that void. I mean, you have to remember that Sam only had a presence in Washington for a short amount of time, but it was a very intense presence. And if you even fast forward to just a year ago, Congress itself wasn't accessible as it was today. You can't just walk in as you can now and go do a series of meetings with lawmakers on the Hill. You had to have an appointment. There were some hurdles and barriers in the way. Now that those have lifted, we're seeing a lot more founders and CEOs of companies come to town. Just last week, we had Brian Armstrong from Coinbase, who did a series of meetings and brought over 40 founders to the Hill to do education with specific delegations. So we're seeing a lot of leaders really step up to fill the void. And I think that we're able to tell the story about where this technology is going. A lot of the development that's going on today is really going to be the foundation for services and applications in the years to come. And so I think we're telling an honest story about where the technology is at and trying to differentiate the good actors in this space against the very, very bad actors like Sam Bankman-Fried.
Kristin, if there's anything to be learned on the eve of this trial, what is the takeaway in terms of what cannot happen again in terms of potentially some systemic behaviors that were going on in the industry?
Well, I think, it's interesting because people in the industry were skeptical about Sam Bankman-Fried and the connections between FTX and Alameda. There was a lot of whispering going on. And I think the one thing we've learned is that when somebody comes out of the blue proclaiming to have great success and doing all of these things to sort of distract people from the actual numbers and the actual operations and throw in, celebrities and all of the kind of razzle-dazzle that Sam brought to this space, I think we really need to be skeptical of that type of behavior. It takes a long time to build good, solid businesses and a lot of work. And we need to make sure that the leaders in this space capture the values that crypto have. We value decentralization and getting rid of middlemen. We value privacy. We value the ability to transact on peer-to-peer basis. If you look at the policies that Sam were pushing for in Washington, these were policies that essentially would have given FTX an advantage at the expense of the rest of the industry. This is a very community-oriented group of people who are working on crypto projects, and Sam did not represent those values. And I think that going forward, we'll be skeptical of anybody who comes in out of the blue proclaiming to have so much success.
Our thanks to Kristin Smith of the Blockchain Association. She is the CEO there. Now coming up next, former Senator Pat Toomey, who is now advising Coinbase as Congress works on crypto legislation. We're going to chat with him next. This is Bloomberg.
Many Republicans on this committee think this is just FTX problem. It's a much bigger problem with crypto generally.
That was Senator Sherrod Brown speaking to reporters last year. And now as the SEC mulls dozens of applications for spot Bitcoin ETFs, Congress is continuing to shape regulation around blockchain technology like stablecoins and cryptocurrencies. We're going to discuss this with Pat Toomey, who's the former senator from Pennsylvania and a member of Coinbase's Global Advisory Board. Senator Toomey, I was with you the day when Sam Bankman-Fried was supposed to testify down in Washington and then didn't make it when the indictment dropped. And there was so many hard feelings in Washington about everyone's relationship to him. How does Washington move past FTX as they try to look to the future of digital currencies?
Well, I think by far the most important thing to remember is exactly the opposite of what Sherrod Brown is suggesting. The fact is, everything that is being alleged against Sam Bankman-Fried, and with apparently quite a lot of evidence to support it, everything is already illegal, and they are the kinds of offenses that have, unfortunately, routinely occurred with ordinary instruments like cash and stocks and bonds. This looks like garden variety fraud, right? It looks like taking customer money and allocating it to a related hedge fund to cover up losses. None of this is specific to this new technology that is potentially really transformative. So that's the most important takeaway. We have, Sam Bankman-Fried deserves his day in court, and he deserves a presumption of innocence, but the charges are very serious, but it's just old-fashioned fraud. And we need to be careful not to paint everybody with a broad brush.
And of course, Senator, he has pleaded not guilty to all 7 of these charges. But part of this, too, isn't just about the allegations of actually something criminal happening here. It's just the idea that he was supposed to be one of the credible voices, lending his voice, whispering in the ears of people on Capitol Hill, donating to political action committees, really politically engaged. And I just wonder, do you think this has set back the effort to have a legislative response to the crypto industry, or did it perhaps accelerate it? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it was stunning at first to discover the enormous problems, the collapse of this guy that everyone thought was this wonderkind. But that's kind of old news, right? We'll see how the trial turns out, but the collapse is old news. And if anything, it should make the argument for why Congress should pass legislation creating clear guardrails for regulation, including consumer protections, something that I and a lot of folks have been calling for years now. We're way behind in the United States. Europe is ahead of us. There are many countries in Asia, even the Middle East, that are well ahead of us in creating a sensible regulatory framework. If we did that, that's where the volume of business would go, consumers would be better protected, and America could retain its leadership position in this space. That's what we need.
Senator Toomey, what does this mean about kind of the state of how Americans view financial services? There's kind of a joke that always goes around about how after 2008, there are many young people who didn't trust the large banks, and therefore they trusted Bitcoin. They trusted Sam Bankman-Fried. And you're sitting here at a time where Congress is very tied up in a historic revolt here. Is it a little bit of wishful thinking here to hope that anything can be passed that changes the guardrails around how people invest their money in this country?
Well, it's only a matter of time, but it's important that that time frame be short. It's already overdue in my mind. I think it's also important to note that the House Financial Services Committee has passed 2 pieces of legislation, one that would create a framework for governing stablecoins, another one for the market structure of the trading of other crypto assets. And both of those bills came out of committee with bipartisan support, all Republicans and a handful of Democrats, which certainly suggests that if either or both of those bills get on the House floor, they're going to pass. I think that's exactly what's likely to happen, probably even this year. Now, I acknowledge that the Senate is a different animal. Some senior Democratic senators and on the banking committee and elsewhere are reflexively hostile to this space without necessarily really understanding it. And so that's a significant burden. But passing legislation in the House would be a big deal. It would be an important step forward. And as I say, a legislative outcome is a matter of time. So I'm hoping for sooner rather than later.
Well, Senator, finally, just on the subject of the House of Representatives, we this hour are waiting to see if there is a table motion on the motion to vacate that Representative Matt Gaetz brought against House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, basically waiting to understand the fate of the House Speaker. What is your view on what we are seeing taking place in the Republican conference right now?
Yeah, this is, I think, the very, very unfortunate exercise driven by people whose motives are not necessarily pure. I wonder how long the Republican conference in the House as a whole is going to tolerate this tiny bit of the tail wagging the entire dog. there's a very, very large, overwhelming majority of Republican House members think that Kevin McCarthy should continue as the Speaker. And if a handful of people are able to derail that, then, okay, what's their idea for what's next? You know, I don't know. I don't think they're going to be able to continue to be disruptive, indefinitely. And I would say, be really careful before you count out Kevin McCarthy. He is proven to be very adept, very skillful. He knows his conference very well. So, however this first vote goes, I wouldn't count him out too quickly.
All right, we have to leave it there. But Senator Pat Toomey, thank you very much. Former senator, that is, from Pennsylvania. We'll be right back. This is Bloomberg. Let's wrap up our coverage with a roundtable about running a crypto business after FTX's implosion. For that, we bring in Ether Capital CEO Brian Mossoff and Delta Blockchain Fund General Partner Kavita Gupta. So, Brian, to start with you, given you are here with me outside of the federal courthouse here in Manhattan, how much was the industry damaged by what we saw go down last November? And could this trial unearth some of that bad stuff, set it back once more?
I think the industry immediately reacted by a downturn in pricing. Sentiment certainly was low, but impressively in the first half of 2023, asset prices came back and the industry's rebounded. It's accelerated regulation in those conversations, and the industry's in a much better place. So I think that there's going to be a pre-FTX world and a post-FTX world, and I think those in the industry are excited for the post-FTX world and to move forward from the event.
Now, Kavita, when you think about the difficulties in moving forward from FTX itself, it's not just crypto entrepreneurs, it was traditional venture capitalists also that were deeply criticized after the fact. How hard has it been to make the case for crypto after FTX?
When the Luna crash happened,
the assets have...
The crypto community really looking at it and saying, how much are we really losing? Is it just the crypto community, DeFi community? But after the FTX crash, what really happened is the traditional market started questioning us, like, is this the whole, even one of the biggest pillar of the space could have a lot of governance issues, and is it all up in the air? But we have seen consistently that it has been, even after the FTX crash, amazing builders have come into the space, really good investments have been done, there have been multi-million-dollar revenue and profitable businesses continue to build, and you still have Coinbases of the world, which is telling and giving a really good signal that there are good players and bad players like any other industry, but that doesn't take away the technology behind it.
But Kavita, did this, if it didn't change the technology, did it change how you look at the founders of the individuals running these businesses, your due diligence process?
It's definitely, it has given us it has given all of us a awakening call to ask them actually questions, which I personally also did, and which is like, when you raise money, where is your treasury going to be? Is it going to be on exchange? Are you going to actually put it into any sort of DeFi products? What is the governance law around it? How much liquidity? How much cold wallet? I think those are the things we always assumed and presumed are safe in hot wallets or exchanges like FTX, which definitely have completely changed the way diligence is done. In a growth stage company, now you want bank statements, which in the space has not really happened to that extent. Yeah. So it definitely has been a very big awakening call.
Brian, when you watch the FTX trial underway here, what are you looking for? Is there anything that you may learn about potential testimonies from critical players in the life of FTX that we haven't heard from since the allegations came forth? What can these potential testimonies tell you?
I think one of the biggest questions people have is just how are retail investors or institutions who trusted this platform, what percentage of their assets are they going to get back? When is that going to happen? You know, what happens in the trial, of course, people are interested in, but the most important thing here is not to damage the confidence of those investors, of those people who are starting to wade into the industry and participate in a brand new asset class. And that's what I'm hopeful for here, is that we see that this is just a bad actor who unfortunately was playing in a new sandbox, and we don't want to paint the industry with that type of a brush.
Kavita, quickly here too, what will you be watching for that can shed new light on what exactly happened?
I think there has been two very polarized views. One view is with SBF, which is like, oh my God, that most probably be people around him did not really keep him updated, which is also his stand, versus everybody around who turned into more of an alibi and like turning their comments into alibi and saying, no, he always knew what's happening. I think this is going to be an ideal case and going to set up sort of a Bible system to see where the governance has to draw the line, where does the regulation and political involvement, the celebrities, the hype, versus the underlying business and the SEC or the transparent accounting system associated with it, which so far has not really existed or being questioned. But I do feel like there will be a rule written out of it.
Kavita, thank you for your time. That's Ether Capital's Brian Mussoff and Delta Blockchain Fund's Kavita Gupta. For Kailey Leinz, I'm Sonali Basak here in New York. Kailey at the courthouse. This is Bloomberg.